What's going on, guys? I am Toxic Jordan. Welcome back to the channel. So today I just wanted to do a little bit of an overview talking about this new event that has come out. Obviously, there's been a lot of gabber going through the community about it, so I just kind of wanted to sit down for a few minutes and give you guys my thoughts on this new event. As well as just go over like all of the event details, kind of take a look, break down the event, look at the different stages, talk about some of the difficulty that comes into the battle at certain points. Throughout the 50 stages, and then, also kind of review the rewards that are available and things like that too. So as a quick note, I know the title might be a little bit misleading. This is not actually going to be a team building guide. I will make a separate video for that. Once that video has been created, then I'll link it in the description below. So yeah, if you're interested in specifically a team building guide, then that will be a separate video entirely where we'll go and take a look at a bunch of different units that may have the potential to, clear this event. But for now, I just kind of want to talk about it in a more general sense. And I guess as a bit of an asterisk on top of that, we are going to be focusing mainly on this team build right here. This is the most widespread team build that I've seen that's been able to clear the event, so we're pretty much going to go off the assumption that you're using this exact team here. Obviously, there are other teams that have beat it. Like I've seen, a team with Glorio leaders beat it. There have been a couple of different variations of this team build with a few of these units, like the Namek Goku and the Super Saiyan 3 Goku switched off for different units like Tech Gogeta or the AGL Namek Vegeta, things like that. But yeah, so for the sake of this video and talking about the general strategies and stuff, we're going to be mainly referring to this team build here, because I think in order to beat it, you're going to have something close to this type of build. So yeah, keeping that in mind, we'll come back over here and take a look. Okay, so before we get into the actual stages of the event, the first thing that I did want to talk about is the rewards. So, in my opinion, the rewards are very underwhelming, and I think a lot of people are tending to agree with that. I think that's the overall, kind of flavor I've been seeing from, the Dokkan Twitter community and YouTube comments and things like that, is that people are not that pleased with the rewards. And it makes sense to me, right? They released the hardest fight in history, literally the hardest thing that they've ever released. It takes a solid 2.5-3 hours to get through if you're really studious about your run and trying to win and playing with strategy in mind. Especially if you can include things like app resets, if you're scouter fishing and things like that, then it takes a very long time to get through. And what do you get for it, right? Clearing up to stage 25 is going to give you up to 25 stones. You get 5 stones per every 5 levels that you clear, and then you get a wallpaper. Actually, okay, while we're chatting here, in my game, I will set the wallpaper so that I can continue to complain. So yeah, we'll come back to the wallpaper in a second. But then once you get further than that, every 5 levels, you're only getting link skill orbs. Now, the funny thing about this is that this is no link skill orbs at all. So 40 of the smalls, that is very, very little, right? It takes 1 of these orbs to get a unit from level 1 to level 2, and then 2 of these orbs to get them from 2 to 3. That's a singular link. So yeah, you're already going to be using if you want to get 1 character, 1 link from level 1 up to level 5, where you would start using the pink orbs, you've already used 10 of these. So these 40 right here is not even enough to get 1 character from level 1 links to level 5 links. It's not even enough. It's not even half enough of what you need, right? And then same deal for here. This is even less, right? You get literally 6 of these. That is so few. That is just insane to me. The amounts that they give out of these link skill orbs has become very apparent to me as far as how little they give ever since I started playing my JP account more. Now that I'm playing my JP account daily, I don't really link level in that account much because I have 10 years worth of content to catch up on, right? So there's always other things that I could be doing, and I've found that it's actually more worth when I have downtime where I'm just autoing stages or whatever, rather than being link leveling where I'm spending excess stamina that I don't have, that I want to be spending awakening units and clearing content and things like that. I'm just running easy A stages so that I can keep up with Zenny, because there's so many new units that come out and so many old easy A's I have to catch up on. I'm just blowing billions and billions of Zenny on all these characters, right? So yeah, grinding easy A stages takes up my time, and I don't even have the ability to really link level in that account. So having resources like this would be very, very useful for a lot of players, I can imagine. But with this measly amount here, like, dude, 6 of these? So that's enough to get 1 unit, basically. If the unit had 6 links only, that would be enough to get 1 unit from level 5 links to level 6 links. Like, huh? That's so bad. That's it? That's all you're giving us? For clearing the hardest event in the game. Clearing the entire thing. That makes no sense to me. It's absolutely baffling. I think that people would be a lot more pleased if there was a lot more incremental incentive. Even if it wasn't, you know, because I've heard people throwing out things like, oh, we need like 100 Dragon Stones, we need 200 Dragon Stones, all this. I can understand why they're limiting the amount of Dragon Stones that you're able to get from it. And I hear that totally. If, you know, even if it's not going to be Dragon Stones as the reward for these things, I just think that giving people more incentive to clear each of the individual phases of this fight would give it a little bit more replay value. And I guess I'll elaborate on that a little bit more as we get into the actual stages of the event. And then, yeah, really quick, I guess I'll go ahead and show you the wallpaper. So this is the wallpaper that you get. Whoop-de-doo. It's literally a copy-paste of the home screen when you first log in to Dokkan right now. That's all it is. And it's not even that good of a wallpaper. There are so many better wallpapers that are like more dynamic than this, which obviously that's not a huge deal. But you would just think that for clearing the hardest event in the game, they would give you a wallpaper that's like a little more relevant, not just like a collage of characters. One, the biggest thing that I hate about it is that there's all this empty space around the side. If they had just zoomed in on that photo and made this collage actually take up the whole screen, I feel like it would look a little bit more like elaborate. It would look a little nicer. It would just from a graphic design perspective, after having made like 1,000 YouTube thumbnails, I can tell you this is like, whoever created this art didn't do a great job. It should just be more zoomed in. That would fix so much of it. But then also they've created so many different wallpapers, including, I guess we might as well set it, including this one that actually moves and has like real animations on it. You know, and they have done ones similar to this in the past. Oh, I guess not that. Well, that one has like the little shimmers with the snow and stuff. Where's the one I'm looking for here? This one, where it has like the sparkles on it and stuff. It's just a small effect. And then even this exact artwork on the home screen when you log in, this image in the middle bobs and it like jumps up and down, and then there's a little bit of a flare in the background and stuff. They could have just added that to this to make it better. Why not? You have to do something really challenging in order to earn it. Like, might as well go all out and make it better. Yeah, so this is one thing I'm going to continue to complain about in the future, that I'm tired of them half-assing these wallpapers. I think it would take very little effort for them to just make them a lot better, right? So yeah, that's my little side rant about the wallpaper. But anyway, we'll move on from that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into, so yeah, those are my just initial thoughts about like the rewards and stuff. Actually there is one more reward here that we get, which is the titles, right? So these are what you're getting, I guess, instead of Dragon Stones, because after stage 35, or 25, once you move on to stage 30, you start earning these titles here. So every 5 increments, so 30, 35, 40, 45, and then 50, you get the Champion of Festival title. Now, this title does look very cool. This is sick. I can't wait to be able to apply this to my profile when I end up beating the event. But all of these subsequent ones, why are they exactly the same? What is going on with that? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me, because it's only differentiated by a color. It doesn't give you any type of number on here that declares, you know, your ranking where you've actually been able to earn to. And the colors aren't even definitive. The one that looks the most similar to the best one is the first one you get at 30. So it just seems like they just created some random art, threw it in here, and called it good. They didn't, like, really think about it. Because, like, okay, it's just a color, which is completely subjective. Some people are going to think that the blue one is the best. Some people are going to think the red one's the best. Some people are going to think the purple one's the best, right? As far as like this collection of 4 right here. So ultimately, where your goal to get to as a player varies based on your own personal bias of which one of these you like the most, and that doesn't make sense because they get harder and harder to achieve out of the few, right? So yeah, I don't really like the way that they set that up either. And then as another side note, again, the increments are too large, especially once you get up to the really, really hard stages. There is so much challenge between clearing stage 45 and clearing stage 50. And you don't get any credit for that anywhere. Because once you've cleared stage 45, you now have all of the missions cleared and all of the titles you're going to earn until you actually clear it at stage 50. Which means every time you replay it now, you get nothing until you beat it. Instead of, oh, I made it 2 phases further. Now I get something else, right? You just get nothing. So that's a really, really poor design as far as encouraging players to replay this event that has already a very, very low, self-motivated factor, because once you lose at 2.5 hours in, you're not going to have the motivation to just start again, right? So I would say that if they were to update the rewards for this, that would definitely help. Okay, so yeah, that is gonna finish my rant about the reward system for this. Now let's get into the kind of strategy guide portion of things that I wanted to talk about here. So we'll take a look at the 50 stages, and I'll just be giving you guys kind of a verbal breakdown based on my limited experience with the event. In full transparency, I've only run the event twice. I ran it initially the moment that the event very first released. I recorded a 3-hour video and ran it on my global account. Didn't really know what I was doing. No one really did at the time. So I did fail pretty early, and then I actually ran it again on my JP account. And I made it a lot farther. I guess I won't spoil that yet because I am going to post a video on it. But yeah, I did make it quite a bit farther. And so I have a little bit of experience with this. And then on top of that, I've also spent about 15 hours watching streams of people playing the event as well. So I have a decent handle on like what goes down in this event, where the choke points are, what are some of the, things you need to note, things you need to look out for. So yeah, I guess this is just going to be kind of a take my word for it portion of the video through the ending here. Okay, so at the very beginning here on phase 1, there is definitely not too much challenge. And again, I am going to be referring to strategy as far as this team build is concerned. So one thing to note with this team is that, obviously in order to get through these very, very ending phases of the fight, I guess, we can go peek ahead all the way at the bottom if you're unfamiliar. But once we get here, this is stage 40 right here. I also have this little rubric to help us keep track of like what stage is what. So yeah, for the most part, it's not these first 25 stages where you're actually going to be earning the Dragon Stones. I would say there are quite a few team builds that can get through this. I don't think it's going to be that insane to do. And in fact, I think in order to clear stage 25, you might even be able to get away with some teams that aren't built with a bunch of stackers, but just normal teams, right? I think that is very possible. And we will do some videos, in the coming weeks and stuff, trying to clear through stage 25, at least with different teams. And I think it is reasonable to even assume getting up to stage 30 and 35, maybe even 40, without like one of these god tier teams with the 10th anniversary LRs on it. But mainly for stage 41 plus, that is going to be the main focus, where you do absolutely have to have one of these teams that's full of these insane stackers that can just get up to ungodly numbers, right? There is absolutely no questioning that. And the reason for that is mainly this right here. So the HP increase is absolutely massive at stage 40. It is something that's kind of easy to keep up with throughout the majority of the fight, but once you get here, like, there's no question, you absolutely need these units that have stacked up a bunch, or at this point you're not going to be able to keep up, right? Okay, so coming back here to the beginning, the first couple of phases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so, I haven't seen people struggle too much with, because obviously they have very low HP pools, very low amounts of damage reduction, and in fact, what you often find is that you're KOing these phases with just one of your attackers. So your entire rotation of 3 units doesn't even have the ability to, get off attacks and stack. You just end up clearing these phases essentially too quickly. Which, that is one... Oh, I guess that's another thing we didn't really mention, is the charge counts here. So from phases 1 to 15, you only have 3 charges to finish the fight, which means you get to select key spheres 3 times, which means you get 1 turn, because you have 3 characters on a turn. So from 1 to 15, you get 1 turn to clear the fight. From stages 16 all the way up to 40, you get 6 charges, so 2 turns. And then from 41 to 48, so starting at that Super Saiyan 4 Full Power Goku, where the HP goes up by an astronomical number, you will start to get 9 charges. And then for the final 2 phases against Vegito and Gogeta, you will get 12 charges, so a full 4 turns to try and take them down. But yeah, so keeping in mind phases 1 through 15, where you only have 3 charges available. So yeah, these first few phases up here, not super difficult, but once you get here into this bulk, I guess what phases would that be? Like phase 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, basically like 7 to 15 overall. These are the phases where I've seen people fail the most, right? Aside from, like, obviously when you get to these really, really tough phases all the way at the end of the fight, but before that, this is a really, really common choke point that I think people aren't thinking about, just because they're assuming, like, all of the challenge is way, way late in the fight, so you don't really need to worry about anything early on. It is very possible to get caught early, while your units that all depend on stacking in order to look amazing haven't stacked yet, especially with the problem that I mentioned, where, for these first, like, 4 or 5 phases, you're only going to be attacking with one of your units, and then the other 2 units on your rotation won't get any stacks at all. So for the beginning of the fight, my best suggestion, strategy-wise, is to share the love, but not too much. So obviously, if we can see here, literally every single unit, all 7 of these units do have to stack over time. And, with the way rotations work out, you can't prioritize stacking with all of these units. So throughout the fight, you're going to have to be rotating your rotations around, right? You're going to have to be rotating units off all the time, keeping units on all the time. It's very unlikely that you'll be able to win this event if you are just keeping a stagnant rotation of the same 2 characters on each rotation and then floating your other unit, right? And that unit that's been floated for the entire fight, regardless of who it is just going to be leagues weaker than the rest of your team, and their attack and defense numbers just won't be able to compare by the time you get to those really, really high stages that just are, blasting out these insane attack stat numbers, right? With, look at this, like, 12 million supers, 17 million supers, 11 million supers. You're going to have to, do a lot to keep up with that. And then these massive HP pools as well. If you don't have ridiculously high attack stats, you're just not going to be able to clear through these phases in the limited number of charges that it gives you. But that being considered, if you start doing this, rotating rotations where you're giving everybody a turn early on, that's where you'll find the most problem. Where in these couple of phases here, now you don't have a single unit that's built up high enough in order to clear through these in one turn. So what I recommend doing for the very beginning of the fight is locking a rotation down, right? Get yourself to a position where from turn 1, you've got a rotation of, like, let's say, the Super Saiyan 4s and Namagoku, and then, like, the LR Gods and Gogeta. Okay, great. Now, keep those units on rotation together, allow them to stack and stack and stack as much as you can through those first 7-8 phases. That way, you don't end up... Sorry about that, my headset shut off on me. But yeah, that way you don't end up accidentally, taking a KO just to not being able to finish this in one turn. And then just don't worry about that 3rd slot unit, because through the entirety of these first, like, 10 or so phases, that 3rd slot unit is never going to attack anyway. So you might as well prioritize getting a really, really high, like the highest possible attack stat number on the first 2 units of your rotation. And then you should have a little easier time clearing through here. Then, once you've achieved that, we hit stage 16 here against the Fusion Zamasu. So stage 16 is the very first point where we're going to have 6 charges available. So now you can start, relaxing a little bit. The fight gets a lot easier at this point because you get a whole 2 turns to clear through these enemies. And if we take a look at the power of the enemies here, so we'll skip this phase here since it's a 2 enemy fight. But if we look at phase 14 here, you've got 60 million HP with 50% damage reduction. And then if you look here, we're up to 80 million HP with 50% damage reduction. It's not that much higher than what you would have just been going against, but now you get an entire extra turn to beat it because you have the 6 charges instead of just the 3. So it really does get a lot easier at this point once you hit here. So what I've found is there's a couple of things that you want to start implementing at this point once you get to the Zamasu fight. So the first thing is, if you are using the Super Saiyan 3 transforming Goku, he does have that interesting thing, right? Like, you do need to transform him into the Super Saiyan 4 form. Now, you will have the ability to do that early on in the fight, but if you choose to do that, when he goes into his Giant Ape form, you are still going to be collecting charges. So it doesn't actually turn cancel the way that, normal turn restrictions and stuff would work. Like we have those clear in 5 turns missions or whatever. The giant forms help with that because they do pause your turn counter. So they don't count as an actual individual turn on their own. Unfortunately, it doesn't work the same way with charges because you're still selecting key spheres. So you are still depleting charges, which means if you transform into the Golden Great Ape, and you're unable to defeat the entire enemy's health down in the 3 charges you get during the Great Ape transformation, then you'll just get KO'd immediately. It'll be game over for you. So the best strategy is to wait until after that Zamasu phase when you're now on 6 charges and it's much easier to take down these enemies because you have so much more time. Then you transform into the Golden Great Ape, use 3 of your charges to get through the Golden Great Ape form. Now he's in Super Saiyan 4 and you're set for the rest of the fight, and then you can use the next 3 charges to actually finish off that enemy. And you'll be good to go. So I have seen, people transform him directly on 16, but I've seen it all the way as late as 18, 19, and people have still been able to do it, right? Because you do have that second turn of charges. The Golden Great Ape himself will not be able to KO these enemies, likely even down to all the way down here at turn, phase 5, phase 6 and stuff. Probably not, right? So yeah, transforming him anywhere between 16 and 19 is probably going to be your best bet. So now something else that you want to do at this point is you want to start, switching up your rotation so that you can give some of those units that have been forced off rotation a chance to come on rotation and get a couple more, extra turns building up and becoming more offensively and defensively viable. So another thing that, makes sense to do at this point, you'll have the tag switch reversals available to you. For the 10th anniversary LRs, so you are going to want to start switching them into their defense mode, because obviously in their base forms here, where you have the Gogeta as Vegeta and you have the Vegito as Goku, they're going to be infinitely stacking attack and only raising defense within the turn. When you tag switch them both, then they switch that, and on their super attack effects, they will be infinitely raising defense and only stacking attack within the turn. So you do want to give them some opportunities to do that so that you're raising their defense. That was one fated mistake that I made in my very first run. I never tag switched them. I only raised their attack the entire time, and then I found that, I was facing off against the very, very final fights with these gigantic super attacks and stuff, and even at this stage, this is where I first failed, was on the Dragon Fist Goku. 4.48 million, their defense numbers couldn't keep up with it because they were only at 300k defense, just because I had never stacked their defense, right? Their attack stats looked insane, very impressive, but the defense wasn't there, right? So you definitely want to make sure to be stacking your defense with these guys as well. So yeah, wise to be using the tag switches frequently. And then another, I guess, little tip I would say with this team specifically is a lot of these units have slot requirements. So I'll get more into this when we do the actual team building guide, but just another thing that you're going to want to be careful about is While these guys are in their base form of the tag switch, like not tag switch to the reversal, but in the form you see them here now, they want to be in slots 2 and 3, are going to give them additional super attacks. When you tag switch them, slot 1 actually gives them the additional super. So just make sure you're paying attention to that to maximize the amount of attacks and the amount of stacks you can give your units per turn. So when you tag switch them, you do want to be smart about making sure to keep them in slot 1 when they're tag switched, and then slot 2 and 3 when they're not tag switched. And then Namek Goku has another kind of similar thing, because in slots 2 and 3, he gets some additional attack boost. He also gets a free additional attack. So I would say it's probably wise to always make sure he's in slot 2 and 3. I would pretty much never put him in slot 1. He does have a piece of his kit where after receiving an attack, he gets an additional. So it's enticing to put him in slot 1 to receive that attack before you attack. But the problem with that is then you lose the extra attack power and you lose the other additional you would have gotten from being in slots 2 and 3. So it makes sense to just put him in slots 2 and 3 anyway, because you'll still get the additional, and then you'll also have more attack power, and then he'll get hit after supering, and that ability will stay active for 4 turns. So on the next turn, you'll still be able to see the benefits from it. So yeah, okay, that's enough about like turn placement and stuff. I will again go into way more detail about that when I make the actual team building guide for this. Okay, so let's keep moving on here and take a look. So we were at stage 16 here against, where'd it go? Oh, there we go. Okay, against Zamasu. So yeah, from this point on, this is where you can kind of relax, right? Because you have those 6 charges, so it makes sense to start building all those defenses and trying to take the 2 turns to clear these every single stage. If you get to the point, you know, like what the mistake that I made in the very first run through of this event that I did, I was purely focused on attack stacking. So what happened was, even though I had 2 turns to clear through a lot of these phases upcoming, I was only taking 1 turn to clear them, because my attack was stacking so much faster than the defensive capabilities of these bosses. So I was clearing it in 1 turn every time, which means that by the time I reached, you know, these like really, really hard phases and I got up here, I was probably maybe 15 turns sooner or something like that in battle than I should have been, which means 15 turns less of attack stacking, 15 turns less of stacking anyway, and that's why I fizzled out on this phase and I wasn't able to get through this HP, because even though I had been purely focusing on attack stacking, ultimately I got a lot less stacks overall, because I didn't purposely go slower and take advantage of the 2 turns that you get to clear each of these phases, right? So really, really important that you make sure to kind of dumb it down. Now, this doesn't mean you should dumb it down to the level of, like, focusing on, you know, nerfing the units, like, with all those turn, or like, slot placement things I was talking about. You definitely should still prioritize those things. But for instance, something that you could do is, like, okay, let's say you're against Fusion Zamasu here, right? And your rotation is, the LR Super Saiyan 4s, and then the LR Gods, and then Vegito. That's your 3 units on rotation. You should probably put the Super Saiyan 4s in slot 1, because they're type neutral, and the other 2 have type advantage, right? So when you're type neutral, you're going to be doing less damage. You'll give the LR Super Saiyan 4s a free chance to do some stacks in here, but they're not as likely to deplete his entire HP pool, because he doesn't have type advantage against them, right? And then your second slot unit, who does have type advantage, is probably just going to cream this guy, and then the phase will be over. Whereas if you put one of your tech units in slot 1, they would cream him, you'd still get the same amount of stacks with the tech unit, but then the physical unit never got to attack at all. And then that's just less stacks you get, right? So be cognizant of those kind of things. Try and force yourself to get more stacks as you move on. That's really the main advice that I can give. And then you kind of just rinse and repeat through a lot of this. Because again, you're still just getting the 2 charges all the way up until turn 40, or phase 40, I guess. So not really much changes between now and then. So here, I guess this is another checkpoint here, the Zamasu fight. Obviously nothing really different about it other than it is phase 25. So that is marked specially because this is the last point where you can earn Dragon Stones and you stop earning, like, real rewards. That's where you get the wallpaper and everything. So stage 25 is kind of like a big benchmark, and I guess that's why they split this in this little graphic that's been created here. So yeah, that is another like benchmark to get to. If you're dealing with a team that is much weaker than this, but you know you still have a couple of these units around to help you do your stacking and stuff that are like your main rotation units, I think it's very, very viable for you to be able to get to stage 25. You could very reasonably stack normally the way you would all the way up past stage 20 or so, and then once you get into these later 20s, if you're finding that you're getting really, really close to dying, you could start popping your active skills and, you know, busting out your major moves with a lot of your hard hitters to be able to get yourself through stage 25. And again, in the coming weeks, I am going to make probably quite a few videos on different team builds that I think can get through stage 25. So we'll be experimenting a lot with these 20 through 25 and seeing what, you know, the limits of power are for a lot of the teams in the game against some of these bosses here. So then, after stage 25, you move on to 2 fights in a row that are against 2 enemies. So that is definitely something notable. Now, obviously, one of the things that they do consistently throughout this fight, anytime you are fighting against 2 enemies at once, they split their HP pool down. So as you can see here, the Zamasu, or the Pikkon has 140 million HP, and then once we go on to this next phase, you're facing off against 50 million and 80 million. So it's not like they're 2 enemies with the same amount of, you know, like defensive power or whatever. They kind of split it in half for you, which is reasonable, which is nice. One thing to note here, the UI Goku does have a 10% chance to evade your super attacks, or any attacks that you do. So that is one thing to look out for. There's not really much you can do about this unless you're bringing a unit that has attacks guaranteed to hit, which I don't think there are any units in the game that are like attack stackers that would be good for this event that do have that ability. So probably not something to worry about. One thing you can note, though, is that the Dokkan attack is guaranteed to hit. No units in the game can evade a Dokkan attack. So, because of that, if you do have the ability to, obviously it would be a very difficult thing, but if you do have the ability to, like, hold out on a Dokkan attack, because you can see it getting close on this phase, then I would say consider that, so that you could launch it against this phase here. Not only will you be guaranteed to hit the Goku, but also Dokkan attacks are AoE, so you're going to do the damage to both of these enemies, which could be really helpful for you. And then exact same thing with the very next phase, right? A Dokkan attack would allow you to hit both of the enemies with your one attack, so that could be a very, very helpful thing for you. But I do find that if you are able to push up through these phases here, you kind of reach a point, at least with this specific team build, you kind of reach a point here where your team starts to be a little overtuned again. Like getting through Pikkon is another hurdle, just making sure that you've stacked up enough to that point, but then the ramp up of the enemies is not that high for a little bit, because as you can see, the HP pool stops going up. So it is kind of ramping up pretty significantly here. You have, you know, a couple phases of 80 million, a couple phases of 90 million, and then only 2 phases of 100 million, then 120, then 120, then 140, right? So that ramp up is pretty tough, but if you can keep up with that, then it kind of mellows out again. You are facing against 2 enemies here, but the HP pools don't really rise that much. They do rise a little bit here. Overall, it's 160, but then it drops back down after. And you're only dealing with 140, and then 140, and then even 130, which Kid Buu will talk about in a second, because he's got this special ability over here, which is why his HP is lower. But yeah, so for these next few fights, it does get a little bit easier, and you're still stacking and getting stronger and stronger throughout. So, yeah, I've found that once you get through Pikkon, you have another, like, where you can take a breath and kind of relax, and it's not that hard anymore. You get, like, another little break, right? Until you get to Kid Buu on, what is this, stage 30, I believe? Yeah, stage 30, Kid Buu is the next really challenging fight here. Now, the reason for this, he nullifies damage from unarmed super attacks. So, this is actually really, really detrimental for this team. And again, this is something that I will get into a lot more specifically. We'll take a look at units and their cards and kits and stuff when I do the team building guide. But yeah, unarmed super attacks are pretty widespread on this team. I believe... Oh man, this is not going to be perfectly accurate, but the additional... So the 12 key supers for Vegito, the 12 key supers for the LR Gods, and the 18 key for Namek Goku, I think, or maybe it's the 18 key for the Vegito, but it's something like that, where those are all unarmed supers. And so you only have a couple units on the team. I think it's like just the LR Gods or the LR Super Saiyan 4s and the Gogeta that don't have the unarmed super attacks. Everyone else at least has like one of their attacks is unarmed supers. So it does get really, really difficult at that phase, because a lot of the time what you're depending on are those additional attacks. They do start to add up and do a lot of damage. So if you're not careful setting up your rotations properly when you're on this phase beforehand, then you can get caught here. If you have like the worst rotation with 3 units that all have, you know, all of their additional attacks are going to be unarmed supers, and so then the whole fight, all you do is one 18 key super that hits him, a second 18 key super that hits him, and a third 18 key super that hits him. He's still going to have like 75% of his HP when you're done with that first turn, and you only get 2 turns. So yeah, this fight can definitely be another choke point if you're not careful, and that's another thing that I would definitely consider when you're doing your team building. Is that you do want to spread out the types of super attacks available on your units. Now, usually when they're building kits for characters, they're pretty good about that. There aren't too many really good units in the game that have the same exact typing of super on their 18 key and their 12 key. So most of the time, you're going to find that at least one of your attacks is going to be able to get off. And then if not your 18 key, then all of your additional 12 key supers will be able to damage him. But yeah, just another thing to be cognizant about. And then again, if you are able to get through Kid Buu, then you do get to relax for a little bit again, because these next, 4-5 phases here are all going to be the exact same amount of HP. And the damage reduction doesn't go up at all either. It's just going to be their defensive stat going up by 5,000 each time, which is virtually unnoticeable at all, right? At this point in the fight, what I notice is that something that helps you a lot is type advantage. Once you've gotten up to, like, 60% damage reduction, which I guess, yeah, we've been at for a while. Ever since PyCon, it goes up to 60% damage reduction, and it stays there pretty consistently. But yeah, at this point, with 60% damage reduction and how high the defense numbers are starting to get, type disadvantage hurts you so badly. When you are attacking an int unit at this point with tech characters, you're doing such little damage unless you're critical hitting. So yeah, that is something to keep in mind when you start moving through these phases post 30, post Kid Buu. And this is where I start paying attention to typing a lot, and this helps me decide which units I'm keeping on rotation and which units I'm rotating off, is to make sure that I'm not facing off against too much type disadvantage for whatever phase is upcoming, right? So that you, again, don't accidentally take a KO. But again, we are still at the point where, you know, you have those two turns to face off against the enemy, so in case you do end up, you know, with all tech units against this int unit, you might still have a chance to clap back on your next rotation with better typings and stuff, right? Which, by the way, I've discovered that one of the strongest rotations to have is the LR Super Saiyan 4s with the Super Saiyan 4 Goku. Not only are they 2 GT characters that are going to be providing Saiyan Roar, which is really, really strong offensive and defensive link for them, as well as a couple of other links that are very, very good for GT characters. And the other thing is their typings. When you're facing off against an STR enemy, the fact that you have type disadvantage, but then you also have type advantage right next to it is so nice, so helpful. So yeah, that's that one of my main rotations that I like to keep on for the majority of the fight is those two together, and just try and keep them paired as much as possible. And in fact, in my final run that I did with my JP account, like where I've gotten the furthest so far, once I had him transformed into Super Saiyan 4, I kept the two of them linked for the entire fight. I didn't switch it up at all, until the very end when I had to start protecting myself from super attacks and things like that. Then it got different, but as far as all of these subsequent phases, that was a very strong rotation for me, just considering typings. Okay, so then the Gammas here, what stage number are they? 36. So the Gammas at stage 36 is the next point where you have to face off against 2 enemies at once. I haven't seen this phase be too difficult for people. Usually, like, these 2-person fights, I guess you would assume that they're going to be a little bit harder. I haven't really noticed that. I think one of the reasons why this Gamma fight is so, you know, quote-unquote easy is because of the typings of the team, right? This team build that I've been using has so much offensive power against, you know, you have 3 tech units here and 2 AGL units that are both going to be hitting really, really hard. So you've got type advantage for basically everyone. It's just going to be the Namek Goku and the LR Super Saiyan 4s that are type neutral. But again, you still have the ability to be type neutral. Yeah, like you're not facing with too much type disadvantage and stuff. So I've found that this stage is actually not that tricky to get through. So yeah, and then I guess this is something that I haven't really noted this far. But if you are using this team build and you know you're still making it through with high enough stacks that are depleting these enemy HP pools in enough turns, then it's pretty much guaranteed that your defensive stats are keeping up with this as well. I have not faced or seen anyone else face too much turmoil early on with the like super attacks and stuff that are being dished out by these bosses. So that's why I haven't really been mentioning the defensive factor here, because it isn't really much of a factor. The main thing that you're fighting against for the majority of this fight is that charge counter and attempting to do damage quickly enough. The only reason you need to consider your defense is for later in the fight when it really ramps up. But for all of these subsequent phases, like there is no reason to really focus on defense too much. Like these enemies pretty much guaranteed can't kill you. So long as you've gotten at least a couple of defensive stacks on everybody at this point, your defensive numbers are going to outclass these regardless of having guard or damage reduction or anything. Just straight up your defensive stats are going to be like higher than this. So yeah, you shouldn't have to worry too much. Okay, and then after we go through the gamma phase, for some reason, it literally just gets easier. This is just an easier fight. Because if you look here, we have 100 million, so that's 200 million HP, which is the most by far, because obviously before that you're only, you only have 160 million that you're dealing with. So that does ramp up a little bit there, but then it immediately jumps back down, and we're back down to 150 million between the two of them. And I'm not sure. I mean, they do keep raising their defense by just a little bit, but it's not that much. They don't have any extra abilities here. They don't have, like, ridiculous super attacks. They have the exact same cooldown, the exact same chance to super. Like, I don't understand why they just made this next phase easier. It really feels like they should have put this one first, and then the gammas after, because the gammas are, by all factors of measuring it, a more difficult phase. I guess the only factor that makes them an easier phase, again, is the type advantage of this team. So if they were building this event specifically with this team in mind, then yeah, I guess it makes sense, because the gammas, you have more type advantage, whereas this fight is basically fully type neutral for you, as you wouldn't have a single STR unit on the team, and then the only type advantage you'd have is with the Namek Goku, against Piccolo here, right? But with only 60 million HP, it's very possible to just one-shot him. Like, if you take your first 5 attackers to get through that, the 60 million is such a low number at that point, it's really not that bad to get through. So, yeah, I've found that this phase, more often than not, I just get through with one turn, rather than even needing the 2 turns to get through that, right? Okay, so then once you move on through those phases, now we are at another point here. You're still kind of coasting, right? As long as you don't get unlucky with the gamma phase, then you're kind of coasting through these next 3 or 4 phases. Same deal. You still have the 2 turns. The HP hasn't ramped up an insane amount. You're still able to keep up with it with all the stacks you're doing. So this is not too hard. You just rinse and repeat the same things you've been doing before. And then we get to stage 40 here against Goku. Let me double check my number. Yes, stage 40 against the 23rd World Tournament Goku. This is the next fight where you might see some trouble, because you have got this here. So the Ki Blast super attacks nullification ability is going to be another thing to consider, right? For this team build specifically, it's not that much of a bother. You only have like 2 Ki Blast supers, I think, on the entire team. I want to say like one of the Vegito's attacks is a Ki Blast. I think the 18 Ki for Vegito is a Ki Blast super. And then is it one of I can't remember what the other one is, but I think there's one other Ki Blast super on the team. But basically all the other attacks are not Ki Blast supers, so it really doesn't affect you that much. It really shouldn't matter. But yeah, if you are using a different team build especially, then this is the next point where you're going to need to check that. So now, notice, stage 30 nullifies unarmed supers, and stage 40 nullifies Ki Blast supers. They did that on purpose, so that now you need to make sure, regardless if you want to beat this, your team's going to need to have a mix of both. Or you're going to need to have special super attacks or something like that, or I guess even weapon supers, to make sure that you don't get cracked from this. Because this one, I think, is much more possible to see units that only have Ki Blast super attacks. I think that is more common than units that only have unarmed super attacks. So yeah, just be wary about that. And then especially if you do have any units that only have Ki Blast supers, in these couple of phases right before, you might want to plan for your rotations to be where that unit is rotated off, so that you don't have to waste, one of your character attacking slots on that. Yeah, definitely something to consider there. Oh, and then I guess I didn't even mention with both stage 30 and stage 40, obviously this is a full LR team, which is advantageous because each of these units does have two different types of super attacks between the 18 key and the 12 key. But if you're bringing TURs in here at all, they only have one type of super attack. So then you could end up facing a lot more trouble in these phases if, it very well could be possible that you only have like one unit on the rotation that can even deal the damage, right? Because if everyone only has one type of super attack, then uh-oh, right? So that is definitely something to keep in mind, especially if you're using TUR units. Okay, so then once you get to the point where we are at stage 41, this is where the fight ramps up insanely. So now you are gifted the extra charge counts here. Phase 41, you're now on 3 turns to clear each of these phases, so that's where it helps balance itself a little bit, and it doesn't become absolutely impossible, because obviously the HP, like, triples at this point. But yeah, not only does the HP get massively higher, the damage goes up a lot here. So this is the point where you do have to actually start being a little bit careful about your numbers. Now, if you have been playing with this god tier team, again, you are still to the point because you have just been coasting over the top with your defensive capabilities for the entire fight. This is the point where it kind of evens out. But you should still be at the point where most of your units, if not all of your units, are capable of tanking against these kind of things. You just might have to be a little bit careful, right? Like, so, okay. The LR gods, for instance, if you didn't rotate them, if you don't keep them on rotation too much throughout the fight, then maybe they'll be at, like 900k defense, or like 1,000,000 defense, something like that, right? Or actually, wait, what am I even saying? No. They would be way higher than that by this point. They would definitely be at like 5 million or something. Yeah, no, honestly, like, I feel like you would have to get pretty unlucky for one of your units. Okay, put it this way. If you were just focusing on attack stacking and or neglecting a specific unit that needed to stack on your team entirely to this point, then you could see some detriment from your defensive numbers. And that was one thing that I noticed when I got to around this point in the fight, that I hadn't been building up my defense at all. So, I rushed here too quickly with the constant attack stacking, as I explained earlier, only taking one phase on all these 2-phase fights. And then once I got here, I realized that my defense wasn't going to be able to keep up. So I switched and started stacking defense. And so now I didn't have as many offensive stacks or defensive stacks as I needed to get through these phases, and then I just fizzled out. So yeah, that balance is going to be important. But if you have been, appropriately applying that balance through this point, then you should still be okay. And these super attack numbers aren't going to be too detrimental for you. It's also worth noting that they have a cooldown of 10. They can only do it once per turn, and they've got only a 15% chance for it to proc. So it's not likely that you're just going to be getting slot 1 supered every turn. But with this team, another thing that you can do that is especially smart at this point in the fight, you've got multiple units here. The AGL Gogeta, the Tech Vegetos, and the LR Super Saiyan 4s. On every single one of their active skill transformations into their fusions of Vegito or Gogeta, they will gift you a Scouter, where you'll be able to see where the enemy super attack is. The one on the LR Super Saiyan 4s is permanent. The other ones last for 4 turns. So definitely something to note here is that if you are worried about taking these super attacks, if you don't think that any unit on your team can tank the super and you need to be, strategic about where you're placing your units in order not to take a KO, then it can be wise to do some scouter fishing, where you transform your unit to to get the scouter active, see where the super attack's going to be, and then before you select your key spheres or anything, you hard close your app and reset it, and then it will take you back to the beginning of the turn when you continue your suspended game, and it will be before you did your transformation, so you don't waste the transformation. You can still hold it for later, but now you have the information of where the super attack is at. Now, some people consider that cheating. I completely understand that sentiment if you're someone that doesn't want to rely on that. I'm just noting that it is a viable strategy. This is not something that the Dokkan dev team has ever viewed as cheating or as, hacking or whatever. You're well within your rights to use this ability. You're not going to get your account banned over using it or anything like that. So don't be afraid to use it. But yeah, that is definitely an option that you have. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so then moving forward here, we do get like a steady ramp up going for basically every single fight for the rest of the event at this point. And this is where I was kind of talking about earlier, where it's a little bit bummy with the titles that they've given you, right? Because right now we're on 41. So every single one of these stages, all the way up to Boo, every single stage gets 50 million more HP, and you still only have 3 turns to beat all of them. So each of these phases gets significantly harder. The Beast Gohan has a countdown super with a massively damaging super attack, and then this Boo also has a really, really strong super attack and just a massive HP pool. He's at 600 million or something like that? Yeah, 600 million, 5.6 million here. He's at 6.3 million with the countdown super, but it doesn't matter. Once you've beaten this phase, nothing that you've cleared here matters at all until you can beat Boo. That's just how they have it set up with the mission rewards and the titles. I think that's so dumb, right? Because there's so much challenge in here, and I could see a lot of mid-tier players and stuff that maybe are missing a couple of units off this god tier team and have to sub in with some not so good units, failing around this point where it really starts to ramp up. And I could just imagine, the first time you get here, you fail because you just were unprepared for the massive change in the fight, right? The next time you're a little more prepared and you manage to get up to here, but you get nothing more for it. So you try it a third time. Now you spent 6 hours in this event, but you only make it to Vegito Blue this time. Boo. You're probably just going to stop playing the event at that point. I would. Because you're not getting anything else for it. It doesn't matter, right? Whereas, at least if you had the encouragement of I just need to make it one more phase, and then I'll get some more rewards, I'll get something else out of it, then it would feel a little bit better. Think about the punching machine, right? The punching machine had very small incremental rewards all the way up to the max damage, so that no matter... every time you ran it, if you only had to do a little bit better to get more rewards than the last time, that was a better, encouragement, more incentive to run it again. So yeah, I think they definitely choked there. They definitely missed on that one. Okay, but yeah, so nothing too specific to talk about with the strategy of these 3 fights right here. The Full Power Goku, the Vegito, and then the Super Saiyan 3 Goku. They're all just straight up fights. There's nothing gimmicky here. Just note that their HP is going to be increasing quite massively each time. So you're going to want to be careful about your rotations and stuff. But yeah, other than that, you don't face another real challenge until you get to Beast Gohan here. Now, Beast Gohan does have a really, really big jump in his super attack power, but that's because he's doing a countdown super here. So this shows you all of the action numbers, basically, that he's going to be doing. So it takes him all the way until his 24th attack to launch a super. This is at the end of the second turn. I believe it's pretty stagnant for that the very... don't quote me on this, but the very last attack of his second turn is going to be the super attack. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. But yeah, you can keep count of it as long as you're just tracking the number of attacks that he does, because it tells you exactly where the countdowns are, where he won't actually hit you with the normal. It instead will just give you the little countdown of the 3, 2, 1 on screen. So the 3 is at attack 6, the 2 is at attack 12, and then the 1 is at attack 18, and then at 24 he actually launches the super at you, right? So 6.3 million, this is the first point where you probably will have to pause and make sure that you've got a unit put in front of that attack that can take that attack, right? I guess unless you're doing well enough offensively that you can actually just KO him before having to take that attack. But that is it's very possible that that's unlikely, right? With a 550 million HP pool, you might have to take the 3 turns. So yeah, just be very cognizant of that as you get through to this point of the fight. So, the next one, this was the most notorious fight on day 1. This was where most of the people that had live streams going were failing, was on the Majin Buu stage. And the reason for that was because of the massive HP pool. This was the point where it just started to be too much. And if you had spent too much time focusing on some of these defensive things and trying to protect yourself from these super attacks or mixing up your rotations, so like one thing that I saw happen to multiple people was the best defensive unit on their rotation was the LR Super Saiyan 4s, who had just massive mountains of defense over everyone else, and was confidently able to, able to tank this super attack. They would put him in slot 3 to be able to tank the super attack at the end, against this ultra super here. But then when you put him in slot 3, guess what? That means that your 1 type advantage unit is off rotation for Buu. So you're doing a lot less damage. And then the other thing is this team does have a lot of tech units. And so that means that no matter what, you're basically going to be facing off against type advantage for a lot of this phase. So yeah, this Buu here I have seen be very, very difficult for people. So definitely something to keep in mind. If you have the possibility to make sure you have some type advantage going here, that's going to be a really, really big help for you, right? And then some of those tech units even could be susceptible to taking a lot of damage from this super as well. 5.6 is starting to get to like not slouch numbers, right? So if you are lucky enough to make it through Buu, you have yet another challenge ahead of you. Yet another challenge before you, which is the UI Goku. So the HP does drop down a little bit again, so it's not going to be quite as difficult for you to, to clear through. But the reason why is because the same thing as the other UI Goku, he has a 10% chance to evade. Now, I haven't seen this cuck anyone too hard yet, but it is very possible. 10% can proc 100% of the time. It's just a chance, right? So you could get very, very unlucky, and this guy could dodge 6 of your super attacks in 1 turn, and then 3 super attacks the next turn, and then 2 super attacks in the final turn, and then you just didn't do enough damage, right? Like, it's very possible that could happen. Not likely, but it is possible. So that's something to keep an eye out for. But obviously, that would just be a feels bad. There's not really much that you can do about that, and it's not a significant enough ability that I would say you need to team build or like plan for it. Same as any of the other dodging phases in here, because their chance to dodge is so low. And especially at this point, you do get 3 full turns to deplete this HP pool. I would say this dodge is more than likely not going to lose you the fight. But just note that it is there, right? It is possible. The main reason why this phase is so hard is because of this. The super attack damage doubles. It more than doubles from the previous phase. Now, you are to the point where you have to be very, very careful. Most of the units on your team, if placed improperly, will get KO'd. And this is the point in the fight where I would highly recommend starting to Scouter Fish. Knowing where that super attack is at is a huge component of knowing how to build your rotations. Because if you're only building your rotations with, optimizing stacks and optimizing, typings for optimal damage and stuff like that, and you're not paying attention to where these super attacks could possibly be, guaranteed, over these next 3 phases, you will die from a super. 100% you will. So, yeah, I would say that, I don't think I haven't seen videos of it. I'm sure maybe someone's done it. I haven't seen videos of anyone clearing this phase, clearing the entire thing with no items without scouter fishing to be able to know where these super attacks are going to be. I think that is a super important thing. Okay, so, yeah, the one thing to note with these next couple of fights, I guess just these next 2 mainly. I can speak to them because I have actually fought these 2 fights. From this point forward, I actually haven't made it that far yet. So I will only be speaking based on the experience of what I've seen, not what I've accomplished myself. But yeah, so for these 2 fights, what I've noticed is that because there are so many attacks per turn. So notice they can only do 1 super attack per turn. That is a nice gift that they at least can't double super, right? And they do have a pretty large cooldown of 11. But one thing that I noticed, even with this 15% chance for it to proc, because the fights are so front-loaded, and in slot 1, you'll have like 4 or 5 attacks, and then right after your slot 1 unit attacks, you have like another 3 attacks or something, and then there's a couple more in slot 2, and then a couple more in slot 3. I found that it is pretty common to see slot 1 supers from these two guys. So you'll see either, you know, before you're attacking or after you're attacking, the super will be there. And one thing to keep in mind is that if you see a slot 1 super from these guys on the first turn, it's likely going to happen again on the next turn, because this cooldown is the thing that saves you from that. But if they super right away, then all the rest of their onslaught of attacks for the turn will fulfill this cooldown. And then by the time the next turn starts, the cooldown will be ready to go, and they'll just slot 1 super you again. So I have found that that happens multiple times. On my last run that I did with my JP account, I actually noticed that the opposite was happening with this guy. He had his super attack, because of the cooldown and stuff, was all the way at the end. Very last attack of the fight. Of the rotation. And so in order to survive it, I had to rotate off my LR Super Saiyan 4s. I actually had to transform them at this point, and oh, no. In fact, I was able to untransform them, I think. I scouter fished to see where the super attack was, untransformed them with the app reset, put them in slot 3 so that they could tank it, and then when the next rotation came up, I scouter fished, and the attack was in the same spot. Because if the attack is the very last attack of the rotation, then he has a cooldown of 11. So he's going to be mathematically eliminated from attacking anywhere else but at the end again, right? So I guess you can use that knowledge, if you're someone that doesn't want to scouter fish, to use the first super attack as an indicator of where the next ones are going to be on the next 2 turns as you continue to fight through the phase, right? So now, another thing to note about the difference between these 2 phases is the HP pool. So the attack stats are obviously not that much different, but the HP pool gets massively, it doubles at this phase. So in order to do enough damage with my JP account, I actually had to transform one of my Vegetos here. I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to do enough damage without that, and I ended up taking a KO on the stage because I got KO'd by the super attack anyway. Yeah, so just be very wary that you're going to need a lot of attack power to get through this phase. This is a really, really tough one. And then once you get through that, now you're on to the Daimas. This is what I have seen be the most troublesome phase of the entire fight. Basically, like, if you can manage to clear through the Daimas, and you still haven't wasted some of your strongest active skills and stuff. At this point, oh, I guess I didn't even mention this. Jumping back a little bit, starting here, I would say, is where it's reasonable to start transforming. With the LR Gods, with the LR Super Saiyan 4s, and in fact, the biggest blunder that I made on this phase, and I think the reason why I lost, is because I did decide to use the Vegeto. So on the first turn, I can't remember what my exact rotations were, but on the first turn, I did have the LR Super Saiyan 4s. I mentioned I put them in slot 3 to tank the super, but I also had them untransformed still. Had I transformed them, I would have done more damage that rotation. And then on the second turn, I transformed Vegeto because he still had like 75% of his HP left, and I was worried about not being able to do enough damage because of the upcoming rotation not being super viable for the fight and stuff. So because of that, I transformed Vegeto. I think what I should have done instead is on turn 1, transform the LR Super Saiyan 4s. They would have done much more damage, and they would have countered the super attack for some extra damage instead of just tanking it. And then I had the LR Gods in slot 3 that ultimately ended up getting KO'd from the super attack. I thought they were going to have enough defense, and they just didn't quite have enough. But yeah, I should have transformed with them as well. And then they would have been able to tank or dodge that super attack, and they would have done more damage for me. And then I wouldn't have had to waste one of my Vegetos, and I think I would have actually made it on to the next fight here. Because with the transformed Vegeto, I had like 1 bar of HP left, and then I got KO'd by the super. And I still had 3 charges left, so I would have still passed the rotation, right? So trading out the extra damage that we did from the Vegeto counters for the 2... 7th anniversary LR transformations probably still could have given me the W on this stage. So yeah, I would say this is the point where you want to maybe start thinking about those transformations happening. Which obviously the biggest downside of that is that you're no longer infinitely stacking. And the point that they're at, they're only going to be stacking for 4 turns at the most. So basically the numbers that you see at this point in the fight is what you're going to have through the remainder of the fight. So hope your stacks are good enough at that point, because this is where you're going to really need to start popping those transformations out, right? And then if you manage to get through this phase without the transformations, you are definitely 100% going to need them here. I'm pretty sure it's mathematically impossible to use this team in base form without any of the transformations up to this point in the fight and win through this stage. I don't think so. These HP pools are so massive. You were just facing off against a 3-phase fight where you had to deplete 900 million HP, and now you're moving on to a 3-phase fight still where you have 2 pools of 800 million. That is so much more. And then, if that weren't bad enough, just being able to fight against the charge counter, look at these super attack stats. What? Like 17.5 million? These are reaching the highest damaging bosses in the game. This is more than the highest damaging bosses in the game. That's insane. So, in order to survive that, you are absolutely going to need to be depending on the fresh transformations from these guys, having the... You know, that's why, honestly, it would be the best case scenario if you could wait to transform until after this phase, because for the first turn of the LR Gods and the LR Super Saiyan 4's transformation, they're going to have that extra 77% damage reduction, which is going to be so helpful against tanking these attacks, right? But if you've been stacking properly and stuff anyway, then you might even be able to just straight up compete, you know, with them, because, you know, they will have guard, or at least this guy will have guard, post-transformation, so that will be helpful for you as well. But yeah, definitely something to note there. And then, you know, another thing that you might even end up having to rely on is the AGL Gogeta. Remember that in his tag switch form, he's got 80% chance to dodge in slot 1. So if you are facing off against some slot 1 supers against these guys, which they've only got a cooldown of 5, so it is pretty likely to see these super attacks launch very, very early in the fight. Depending on that tag switch, Gogeta for dodging could be a good idea for you, potentially. Especially just considering even their normal attack damage is ridiculous. Their normal attacks do 5 million. So your defensive stat is going to need to be 5 million if you're type neutral with no guard and no damage reduction, right? So yeah, that's these guys are no slouches. This is an absolutely insane fight to get through. So yeah, for these few fights here, I wish you luck having a Dokkan attack or 2 to be able to carry you through. Now, obviously, because you're limited to 3 turns, we know that this is a total of 12 turns. So you're only going to be able to see 1 Dokkan attack through these fights right here. So, you know, obviously the benefit of the Dokkan attack... well, okay, I guess I'll start here. The benefit of the Dokkan attack... Well, I guess here. Benefit of the Dokkan attack here is that you might not have to worry about this really tough super, because you might be able to clear it in 2 turns. Benefit of the Dokkan attack here is you're going to reach a deficiency with the amount of HP that this enemy has versus the amount of stacks that you've gotten at this point in the fight. Benefit of the Dokkan attack here is that he won't be able to evade it, so you'll be able to guaranteed get a big pool of damage down. Benefit of the Dokkan attack here, you again reach an HP deficit, and then also you might have to take less of these ridiculously damaging super attacks. Benefit of the Dokkan attack here, this is by far the hardest phase of the fight. Just period in general, it's the hardest phase of the fight. Obviously, these are something to talk about. We'll get there, but I'll explain why they're easier in a moment. And also there's 2 enemies, so if you did manage to get a Dokkan attack here, then you're going to be doing damage to both of them at once, which would be really, really helpful for you. So, now, if you are lucky enough to get through the Daimas, you're on to the final 2 phases of the fight. You've got the Super Gogeta and the Super Vegito. Both of them have 2 billion HP, 7 million attack stats, with 70% damage reduction, and 24.5 million damaging supers. Insane. Not only is that super attack hitting that hard, but it has 0 cooldown. So it can just happen at any point. And then for Gogeta's, he's going to be greatly raising attack when he does his super. So it's going to hit harder than that. And then all of his normals after the fact, remember, 0 cooldown. So you might get slot 1 supered, and then all the normals for the rest of the turn are going to do, what, like 11 million or so. And then for Vegito, he's got the same damaging thing here. He doesn't have the great raise, but he doesn't need it because he has, you know, the ability to super you 3 times in a turn. There's only a cooldown of 3 on those super attacks, and it's got a 50% chance to proc. So this is just insane. This is just so nasty. But, you still have a lot of utility left on the team. If you've been playing wisely, if you haven't been wasting your resources that are available on this team, you're still going to have access to your Vegito and Gogeta transformations. Now, it's very likely that you're going to need to use, you know, at this point, you pretty much, between these phases right here, should have already transformed your LR Super Saiyan 4s and your LR Gods. That should be a given for you at this point. And if you've done that properly, then those transformations are set, but you still have your Vegitos and Gogetas. I would say during this fight, it's not completely unreasonable to do one of your Vegitos, because the fact that there's 2 enemies means there's going to be a lot more attacks against you. And so transforming into Vegito just means that, you know, if you use the target all skill, all of those attacks that they do are going to provide a lot of additional damage from the counters that he does throughout the turn. So again, not only is that Vegito transformation invincible, so you won't have to worry about these ridiculous super attacks for that turn, you're also going to just do a shit ton of damage, and that's going to help you get through these phases. But if you've played everything properly as you should have, then, you know, when you get to this Gogeta phase, you'll still have one of your Vegito transformations left. Now, okay, I guess one thing that I need to point out here, we have to kind of like talk about this out of order just to understand the strat here. So for this final phase, the thing that you need to make sure you have set up for the very first turn that you get into this final phase is you need to have a Vegito and a Gogeta ready to go, with both of them available to use their active skills. So now you can have transformed them already. That is okay. You just need to make sure that this is the active skill turn, because the transformations for them are just going to turn them into Gogeta and Vegito, right? Giving them some special abilities. But then the active skills that you use on top of that, for the Super Gogeta, he will provide a massive attack and defensive support for the entire rotation, just for that turn. And then for the Super Vegito, you get the target all skill, and he gets massive defensive buffs to where he is legitimately invincible. These super attacks will actually, he'll double-digit tank them. So you need to make sure to have that available for this final phase. If you launch that, and you have this ready to go, you should be able to win with just your Vegito on that final turn. I mean, obviously, maybe you'll have like another turn after that or something where you might have to throw like the LR Super Saiyan 4s in the way of a couple of attacks and hope that they counter, because they still will get screamed. Like everybody on the team, if they get hit, other than that active skill turn Vegito, will die from these final phase supers. So you got to be careful about that. But if you're able to dodge with the LR Gods, or if you're able to counter with the Super Saiyan 4s, then you could be in a really good position there. And then I suppose, you know, saving their final active skills, where when the enemy is below 50% HP, you can launch a hard-hitting super. Those would be wise to wait until the very end to do as well, in these final couple of phases, right? But yeah, so keeping in mind that you need that for the final phase, it is okay to transform one of your Vegitos early here, and then maybe you could use the active skill for the first one transformed on this phase to help you deal a lot more damage here, and then the second one you would use here, right? Or like, let's say you so you transform Vegito number 1 on this phase. You don't use the active skill, but you transform him so that he is in Vegito. He can tank a little better. He can provide some active or some counter attacks and do a lot more damage for you. And then, because his transformation lasts for 4 turns, on the next turn that he comes back onto rotation, then you use the active skill. Now you have the target all against a type disadvantage enemy, so you're going to just be doing a crap ton of damage. You'll be safe against these ridiculous super attacks, and then hopefully that should be enough to get you through. If it's not, and you're still on this phase, then you transform the other Vegito, maybe transform your Gogeta as well, and get a little bit more protection. Again, you're still going to have to be careful about these ridiculously damaging supers. You might have to depend on the gods or whatever. But then, yeah, hopefully that would be enough to get you through. And then once you get through to this final phase, then you would use those final active skills and have your last target skill mechanic turn ready to go, and Vegito would finish things off for you. Okay, so I think that is the best way that I can explain it just verbally without actually like going into fight and showing you. So obviously the end here did get a little bit team buildy specific and wasn't just like generic strategies. But the reason for that is because this is basically the only team build that I've seen be able to get through this, right? And even with other team builds like the Glorio team and stuff, people are still running these units on the Glorio team. These units are all still on there. Well, the LR gods are actually not, but basically the rest of them are. So yeah, with running the rest of these units, you're still going to be following the exact same strategy for the end of the fight, right? I haven't seen anybody clear these last couple of phases without relying on the 10th anniversary fusions, and that is the reality of it. So if you were in here hoping that I had some magic strategy about how to, clear through this fight without the 10th anniversary LRs, unfortunately, that is not going to be the case. Like I said, in the coming weeks, I will make some solid attempts at trying to get as far as I can, maybe without the LR gods, or like the 7th anniversary LRs, and or without the 10th anniversary LRs. We'll see, but I'm imagining that stage 25 is going to be like the pinnacle limit for that kind of thing, maybe stage 30. But yeah, if you're hoping to clear this entire thing, that is basically your sole option. You're going to have to depend on these guys. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of it. That's how the fight goes. So if you have any other specific questions or curiosities about the build of this fight, or any phases of the fight that you're struggling with for some specific reason and you can't figure out why, or any choke points that you're unable to get past, then please feel free to ask me some questions in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to elaborate more on this as we learn more about this fight. We're all learning together, right? So, and if you guys have any special advice that you think has helped you, or that you've seen anybody else talking about that I didn't cover in the video, also feel free to blab about that in the comments. I'm sure that everybody viewing the video would love the additional advice as well. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and finish it up here. Best of luck in your runs on the Festival of Battles. And also feel free to shoot a comment letting me know how far you've made it in the Festival of Battles. So for me on Global, like I mentioned, it was here to Dragon Fist Goku. And then on my JP account, I have made it here to the Super Saiyan Goku. So let me know if you have outclassed even me in the Festival of Battles so far. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to check out the links in the description below. And I will catch you guys next time. Peace.